So Yoram Hazony, who I generally admire, has, in my opinion, taken the wrong side in a long-running dispute between Taleb and Claire Lehman and Quillette, where Taleb is essentially claiming that Quillette and Claire Lehman are kind of closet Nazis for talking about IQ research. Yoram Hazony is wisely skeptical of people who are obsessed with racial differences. There is this tendency for people who are on the radical right to try to shoehorn research about racial differences into their ideological position, and often they are using tunnel vision. They're ignoring the larger picture in order to suit their political aims. But Claire Lehman is not such a case at all. Claire Lehman is indeed, I believe, on the left to a significant extent, and is not an example of these bad faith actors. So I think that we can try to understand Yoram Hazony's position here. I think that he generally just believes that research on IQ differences is a lot less solid than people who specialize and who look into this field consider it to be. He says that not all academic disciplines produce good theory, and not all theories useful in their area are good when exported to other fields. So here he's essentially saying that even if the IQ researchers are correct, they're applying their logic, they're applying their reasoning to politics in a way that's pathological. Now, I think that that's essentially totally wrong, because if you look at the actual researchers, they don't make the bombastic claims that the alt-right makes, and they don't support those claims. They're, in general, the political valence of actual researchers is a lot less radical than the people who are trying to use their research for their own political aims. So I think that Yoram Hazony misses the mark here in his criticism of academics as being too eager or incorrect in applying their findings to politics. Indeed, in my opinion and in my experience, people who look into these things are overcautious in terms of talking about the political implications of their research for understandable reasons. There are consequences to your career if you talk openly about the political implications of your work. He says, I'm not yet in a position to say whether population genetics is producing good theories in its own limited domain, but I can tell you for sure that what is being exported into popular theory is producing a body of thought both false and monstrous. I don't believe that he's correct here, that research on population genetics is bringing into being a body of thought that is false and monstrous. I think that this body of thought has existed long before population genetics, and indeed disagrees cardinally with many of the results the population geneticists find. They attempt to use certain aspects of population genetics research for their own political ends, but in large part, when you talk to them in detail about the findings, they recoil. They don't like the actual findings. They like very, very narrow slices of the findings that researchers produce. And their political ideology predated these findings by a long shot. And it's useful here to have some knowledge of the background. If you look at, say, Nazis in Germany, they were very against research into population genetics and psychometrics and stuff like that, because it generally undercut their narrative, and because it kind of undercut their philosophy. They were romantics more than scientists. They did not like the specificity, the kind of cold nature of psychometric data and data about relatedness. They were more inclined to believe in a spirit of a nation which was essentially unscientific. They didn't like scientific theories very much, actually, and that fact is sort of replicated in their political descendants. When you talk to them about scientific facts, they tend to very quickly say, even openly, that they're not really about that. What they're about is their feelings. What they're about is their values, in a way that supersedes scientific findings. Yoram Hazony continues. Some of my favorite, mostly leftist professors seem surprisingly uncritical about the scientific results and alarmingly nonchalant about the way these results are being used on the alt-right to justify proposals of a new race-based political order. It's time to rethink this. I think that his perspective essentially boils down to not understanding the power of these arguments and not understanding the valence of these arguments, the way these arguments are actually being levied. He assumes that his experience with alt-right trolls essentially defines how these arguments are being used, while I think that, once again, he's looking at a very narrow slice of people who are using this research and is overestimating their relevance because they're very few people with a very large bullhorn. There are other problems that arise from not taking this research into account, such as when you are talking to the left will say that the differences in outcome are the result of oppression. If you try to dodge away from this subject entirely, you end up simply ceding the ground to the left, and this is not a good idea. You need an explanation, and if you don't have an explanation and you just avoid the subject, you look very guilty. Let's see. I don't use expressions like seem destined when talking about science. No one could have successfully wielded one of these seem destined speculations of Rick Newton, Maxwell, Einstein, or others. I don't think human sciences are on a clearer glide path now. This is almost standard science denialism, right? It's looking at paradigm shifts in science and saying that they invalidated what came before. In reality, these models are merely added sophistication, added details to a general picture which was made clear by experimental findings. Einstein changes our fundamental view of the universe in many important senses, but he does not invalidate the predictivity of Newton within certain bounds, within the bounds that it was measured. So this is essentially kind of a soft science denialism, saying that, oh, well, things can be revolutionized, so we don't need to care about the findings that happen now. This is simply incorrect. The fact is that our revolutions in understanding do not invalidate past causal links that were uncovered by past scientists. Let's see. He continues to say that a lot of what comes out of academia is overhyped. That's true, but it's generally overhyped. Well, for a couple of reasons, either to improve the relevance of someone's work, or to bolster their political position. In the case of IQ research, you don't bolster your political position by emphasizing the findings that have come out. So I think that this criticism is worth keeping in mind. Scientists will tend to be bombastic, but they won't tend to bring politically inconvenient facts, invent them out of whole cloth, and then kind of quietly squirrel them away when they're lying. When they're lying, they'll generally kind of trumpet the facts that they make up, and the facts will be convenient for them. That's exactly the opposite of what we see with research in this field. Here we go. Academia doesn't tend to produce skeptics in any field. Each subdiscipline draws mostly those inclined to accept its dogmas. The tenure process and peer review reinforces orthodoxies. Well, this applies least to the study of human variation, for obvious reasons. You are, as someone in the modern West, politically inclined to be skeptical of the findings that arise, and these findings are, for that reason, very well tested. There are many, many, many attacks on IQ which were fended off not because people loved it so much, but simply because the findings were inescapable. It's actually a very simple set of ideas which, once you see, you essentially can't unsee. And there was something else. Yes, here. Sean McClure says, fitting a model to data and discovering a model from data are two very different things. Taking something like intelligence, which lacks any cohesive definition and shows the hallmarks of emergence, cannot be understood by matching simplistic trends to scattered lines. This is simply a complete misreading or complete ignorance about the study of intelligence. What we have found is that intelligence is a general phenomenon, that however, whatever gives rise to intelligence, it applies to many different things that are G-loaded, that seem to require the same set of traits. And so someone who's good at math is more likely to be good at chemistry, is more likely to be good at analyzing literature, etc. This means that the statistical structure of intelligence is fairly simple, and you can boil it down to a general factor and make valid predictions. Now, what underlies that general factor is less clear, but the fact is that we can study it as this general factor. And because of that, we can use tests that are G-loaded, tests that predict your performance at a wide variety of intellectually straining tasks, and use them, deploy them for various practical uses. So, for example, the Army can use intelligence tests to try to put people who will be competent maintenance men into their place, and avoid putting people who will make mistakes into those crucial places. It's just a practical reality that this general factor of intelligence exists in humans, and so we can make predictions from it. More knowledge is always good, but at this point we have the knowledge that we need to make several practical claims, and those are the practical claims that are made by people who are researching human differences. Here he says, nobody subscribes to racial or genetic determinism, and he replies, I understand it's not the issue. At issue is whether national politics should be shot through with references to skin color and gene pools, because these things are statistically crucial to politics. Call it low octane. Racial determinism is racial determinism nonetheless. I replied, national politics is falling into the terrible morass you describe. The way to prevent this is to respond directly to the left's straightforward and strident claims that certain skin colors and gene pools are oppressed. Attempting to ignore and bury their concerns won't work. And to characterize people who are researching statistical differences in group outcomes as being determinists who are seeking to make everything about race is just off the mark. The reality is that if you want a practical, ethical, and functional politics, it needs to be based on facts about what drives group differences, because group differences are very, very important to politics. When you try to duck out of the subject entirely, you'll get chased down and beaten by the left, as the right has been over and over again. It is a question of incredible moral and practical importance, and to just duck out of it and say, well, I don't really care to understand this in any way, science is flawed, is in my opinion just irresponsible.